Oh my god, be shocked. I'm here to talk about books. Like, aren't we shocked? It seems like my channel had suddenly become devoted to K-dramas, which, don't get me wrong, there's gonna be a lot of K-drama content. I'm very excited for the next episode of my little funsies project that I do with my friend Rebecca, because we're gonna be talking about what right now stands as my favorite drama of 2021, and that might not change, but that's okay. So I bought some books. Um, I'll tell you what I am reading currently, and then we will just go through, here, get ready, this stack of books that I bought, though to be fair, like 6 of them are books that I've already read, and in some cases even talked about on this channel, but like I wanted them on my shelves. Currently, I just finished listening to The Memory Police, which was a very interesting novel. Yeah, I kind of don't know what else to say about it other than that it was super interesting. So now the 2 books that I have that I'm reading are both digital arcs. I have Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir, which is very exciting because I'm a big fan of him, both The Martian and Artemis. And then I have She Who Became the Sun, and it's something Parker Chan. I can't remember her first name and I deeply apologize, but it has been pitched as Mulan meets the Song of Achilles, and sign me up. I'm here for it. Also, the cover was gorgeous, and like I'm really excited to get down into it. So then let's talk about me spending money on books and on books that I've already read. So I think about this a lot in that I obviously have 3 large bookcases because books are kind of one of those things I don't want to let go of. They're pretty much the only physical thing I really collect. And when I got into that mindset of that I am collecting books, I started to get way more particular about owning physical copies, and not only that, owning particular editions of physical copies. So that's why ultimately the library of books that I have read is larger than the library of books that I own. I mean, obviously, it's the case for most people, but also I have an awful lot of ebooks and audiobooks, and sometimes I'll own multiple iterations of the same book, and usually I might have listened to it, I might have read it on Kindle, and then I said, hey, I actually really want to own this. It's kind of the case with a bunch of these books that I'm about to show. You're gonna notice a theme for 6 of these, which is, I don't own a lot of nonfiction. Let's put that out there. I tend to like my nonfiction in the audio format. I usually find that easier to digest, and I tend to prefer essentially narrative nonfiction. I want it to be told like a story while also giving me tons of information. And as we know, in 2020, there was a weird little thing I got into, and that was like mountain climbing disasters. It's a really morbid topic. Yeah, I got really into like mountain climbing disasters, probably because I look at mountain climbing as something I will never ever do in my lifetime. One, I'm not that good with cold. Ironic since I ice skate, but that is a level of cold that I cannot do. I lose blood in my extremities way too fast. And also, like, I'm not a fan of climbing something where I get to a point called the death zone where I'm like actively killing my brain cells because of a lack of oxygen. Hard pass. But kudos to the people who do it. Like, I can understand why people go to do it. Anytime I've, read anything involving mountaineering and they give their reasoning, it's like, I get it. I really do. I just know I can never do it. So let's talk about some of these mountaineering books that I got. Dead Mountain. The Untold True Story of the Dyatlov Pass Incident by Donnie Eichar. I am not entirely sure how to say that. So, the Dyatlov Pass incident was in the news actually again quite recently, mainly because this is a big old mountaineering mystery. Actually, it's not even, does it count as mountaineering? Whatever, it's just a big old mystery. It happened in 1959. So for those who don't know, I'll read some of the back jacket. In February 1959, a group of 9 experienced hikers in the Russian Ural Mountains died mysteriously on an elevation known as Dead Mountain. Eerie aspects of the incident, unexplained injuries, signs the hikers cut open and fled their tent without proper clothing or shoes, a strange final photograph taken by one of them, and radiation readings on some of their clothes have led to decades of speculation over what really happened. Bonus points, it was the Soviet Union, which just sort of adds to mystery and mystique. But it also means that if the government put anything out, there was like, you couldn't really trust what was said. And it was an age of suspicion. And we're still kind of in that, but I guess in the Soviet Union it was probably worse in 1959. Well, Donnie, because I'm not going to try and screw up his last name again, Donnie not only investigates the Dyatlov Pass incident, he actually went to Dead Mountain. He went there to get a look at the land himself, to try and come up with plausible explanation, but also to go through the various theories, well, the most plausible ones. Like, if I recall correctly, he didn't really cover aliens or Bigfoot or anything, but he looked at a lot of the plausible ones, like avalanche, government involvement, like all sorts of things, to try and come up with an explanation for what happened. I rather liked his explanation in this book. I do understand that recently there's a theory, it's a pretty predominant theory, which is that there was some kind of avalanche, because obviously an avalanche is very sudden. There's nothing you can really do about it. You can try and run, but it doesn't really work most of the time, which would explain why these individuals would cut themselves out of their tent and run without any proper clothing. I believe most of them are said to have died from hypothermia, but it would also explain why some of them had some pretty catastrophic injuries that didn't really make sense. I understand that this was in the news recently because I guess somebody who's pursuing this theory, frequently been told, this isn't at an elevation, or, topographically it doesn't make sense for there to be an avalanche. So they hit up the animators of Frozen and said, hey, that program you designed for snow, do you think we could apply it to this? Like, could it work? And they said yes, and they applied the program. I think they said that basically the result was, yeah, it could be possible, but we can't guarantee you that's the solution. Whatever the case is, it's a really interesting book, and it's not that long. It's 288 pages, and that includes the index. So, it's not that long. It's very interesting. Denali's Howl, the Deadliest Climbing Disaster on America's Wildest Peak by Andy Hall. So let me read you some of the back jacket of this one, for those of you who have no idea what this is. In the summer of 1967, 12 young men set out to climb Alaska's Mount McKinley, known to the locals as Denali, which means the high one, the mountain with the highest base-to-peak climb in the world. After a month on the mountain, caught in the eye of the perfect storm, only 5 made it out alive. So 7 people died on the mountain, and if I recall correctly, all of their bodies were just left on the mountain because they could not get them. What I remember from this book, because it has been a while since I read it, but yeah, I thought it was interesting because I don't read too many books where the climbing disaster takes place in the US. They tend to happen in the Himalaya because that's where the highest mountains in the world are. I mean, makes sense. But so I was sort of interested. I'm like, oh, and this happened here. I'm like, it's Denali. It's in Alaska. Like, I know where that mountain is. And no, I don't call it Mount McKinley. And anybody who still calls it Mount McKinley can, we're going to have words. Because not only is Denali a better name, it is the proper name for that mountain. So, this group of men, who obviously you see here on the cover, went up. I think there were some disagreements within the group, so they broke up almost into 2 separate groups, and some people got trapped in one location, some got trapped in another, and this literally, this perfect storm kind of hit almost out of nowhere, slammed them, and they were stuck. Nobody could go rescue them, nobody could get to them, there was no air support they could give them. I mean, obviously, also this was 1967, kind of limited air support. They couldn't get down, they couldn't go up, they were just stuck on the mountain. And Andy Hall is an interesting person to write this book because his father was actually I almost want to say he was a chief ranger at Denali National Park or something. His father was actively involved in the rescue efforts because he had some sort of position of management or something involving the national park where Denali is. But yeah, so it was very interesting. It was also interesting to hear some of the controversy it's addressed later on in terms of there was a lot of criticism that involved people saying why didn't you go get them, were the rescue efforts enough? And I'm I don't think anybody really can judge unless you were there, but that's sort of my opinion. I came to that opinion after hearing about other mountaineering disasters, and I said I think when you're from the comfort of a distance, it's really hard to understand the mindset of the people who are actually there. But whatever, it was a super interesting book. The next 2 books have a theme. The theme is the 2008 K2 disaster. let me read some of the back jacket of this one, which is No Way Down, Life and Death on K2 by Graham Bowley. This was actually one of the climbing books that I ordered that I had not actually read, though I'd read stuff on the 2008 incident already, so I kind of knew all the information that was in here, but I hadn't read this particular one. On August 1st, 2008, no fewer than 8 international teams of mountain climbers, some experienced, others less prepared, ascended K2, the world's second highest mountain, with the last group reaching the summit at 8 p.m. Then, disaster struck. A huge ice chunk came loose above a deadly 300-foot avalanche-prone gully, destroying the fixed guide ropes. More than a dozen climbers, many without oxygen and some with no headlamps, faced the nearly impossible task of descending in the blackness, with no guideline and no protection. Over the course of the chaotic night, some would miraculously make it back. Others would not. For those of you who don't know, of the, 8 teams, there were like 14 climbers, 11 of them died. It was a pretty bad incident. And it also became pretty controversial. So K2. I'm pretty sure the quote is in this book, and I'm going to find it because I've just really discovered for most people it is an apt quote when it comes to K2. Well, that makes me sad because I can't find it. Whatever. Essentially, the quote was, K2 is a vicious mountain that's out to kill you. Legitimately. It is interesting because what little I understand now of mountaineering, having read a variety of books, is that, yes, Everest is the highest mountain in the world. It has also been commercialized to the point that any idiot, if you've got tens of thousands of dollars, can go climb Everest, because you'll essentially have people half carry you up the mountain. I hate to say it. K2, however, is called basically kind of more like the mountaineer's mountain. You don't fuck around when you go to try and climb K2. Like, if you're going to go climb K2, you better have mountaineering experience, because there are no, like, guided missions who are going to help you get up to K2. You're on your own. Like, it is only climbers who are going to do K2, because it is a vicious mountain that's out to kill you. And supremely difficult, even though it's only the second highest mountain in the world. I'm like, only the second highest. I'm not going to climb any of these. Now, the other book I have in this incident is one, and I think everybody should read. If you're going to read about mountain climbing disasters, if you're at all interested, I think this is a really important book to read, and that is Buried in the Sky, The Extraordinary Story of the Sherpa Climbers on K2's Deadliest Days by Peter Zuckerman and Amanda Padoan, probably screwing up her name, and I'm sorry. The Sherpas and the Haps, Haps standing for High Altitude Porters. These are essentially the natives, the indigenous, those who live in Tibet, Nepal, I believe it's on the border of Pakistan, China. Like, these are, they get often reduced to kind of like servant roles, and that's sort of how they get to be treated. There was a lot of controversy in the 2008 disaster, especially with one of the teams. The idea that because the feeling of the Sherpas and the Haps, because several Sherpas and died in this incident. It was really, it was hella tragic. In some cases, like, they really didn't need to die. There was this controversy in that one of the teams essentially had the attitude of, well, we paid you to do this, so you owe us your life, which is a horrible effing attitude. I realize I've already sworn in this, but it's a horrible attitude. It is. So many things I could say about that. Because oftentimes these Sherpas are better climbers than most of the people there. Like, you have to be an adept climber to be a Sherpa or a Hap. You really do, because you can't fuck around. And they are a crucial part of any, and I do mean any, climbing expedition. And they kind of get no credit, which makes me sad, because oftentimes these guys have ascended multiple peaks multiple times because they've just taken on different expeditions and different jobs, and it is their lifeline. It is for them, like, their entire economy and the struggles they go through in order to get these jobs and keep these jobs, and it's just a fascinating outlook, and it is a perspective I don't think we get enough of. And I think it's particularly important when it comes to the 2008 disaster, because, like I said, several Sherpas died. In one case, I remember there was there was a pair of brothers and a cousin, and of the three, 2 of them died. In fact, one of them died going to rescue his brother. And it didn't need to happen. It just makes me angry when I consider the way they were treated. And some of the attitudes, even of people I know who've never gone mountain climbing and who have attitudes, and I'm just like, really? These are people. These are human lives. But also the fact that one of the Sherpas in particular ended up sort of being the hero of this entire story. I think he was actually named by National Geographic or something, like, Adventurer of the Year. He spent, like, days up in the death zone coordinating rescue efforts, like, going out himself, keeping an eye on the mountain, like, trying to bring down these, 14 climbers who were all stranded up there. And he was like, okay. And yeah, I just think this is a really important book on a often overlooked perspective when it comes to an admittedly kind of morbid topic that I just find interesting. Yeah, it's just really good. I don't know what else to say. Okay, and the next two are on a similar disaster as well. And I've already talked about them on this channel, and that is Into Thin Air by Jon Krakauer and The Climb by Anatoly Bukrev. Briefly, can we talk about the beauty of this very minimalist design? It makes me so happy. Like, I hate, and I do mean hate, the design for the US version because it has different color typography and it just irritates me. The designer to me is like, why is that in red? Can we please just stick to a color palette versus this? Simple, bold, in your face, pretty much gets everything across. Love it. And then, of course, we have The Climb, and this is another case of two color types. I'm a little more forgiving of this one. These are both about the 1996 Everest disaster. Very famous. They made a movie about it. It's called Everest. Came out like a handful of years ago. It was actually pretty good. I was actually pretty impressed with that movie. I think it really accurately shows you how I'm like, just don't fuck with nature. Just don't. I like to call these a dueling accounts of the same incident. Why is that? Well, obviously, Jon Krakauer wrote Into Thin Air. Many a student has read this by this point. I just remember whenever it was school book season, we would have to order a lot of copies of Into Thin Air. And Jon Krakauer was writing for Outside Magazine. So his account, Into Thin Air, initially was like a magazine piece, and then he wrote a book, Into Thin Air. Now, this is what is known as the updated second edition, and that is because he had some crucial mistakes in his initial edition. Now, some of these mistakes were almost like not his fault because they were a result of a lot of chaos that it obviously was going on. But this became very famous. However, he had a not super lovely portrait of Anatoly Bukrev. Anatoly Bukrev was one of the guides on the other climbing team. So Jon Krakauer was on one team being led by Rob Hall, and Anatoly Bukrev was on the other team being led by Scott Fisher. And Jon Krakauer really did not paint a lovely portrait of him in Into Thin Air, which I admittedly find a little strange, considering Anatoly Bukrev went out on his own into the storm and rescued people. Like, bro, seriously, you're shitting on a dude who's literally kind of heroic? Do I think Bukrev paints a totally objective portrait of himself? No, of course not. But there's the famous saying, there are three sides to every story: your side, their side, and the truth. And I said in my review, I said, the mountain is the only one who knows the truth. Mountain ain't talking. But I think it's important to read both of these. If you've read Into Thin Air, I do actually highly recommend reading The Climb because I think you'll find it interesting. And I'll also give you more perspective. Now, the next 4 books also have a theme. Non-related to mountain climbing. Yeah, you can probably already tell by these. Korea. That's the theme. So, these 2 books. Misuda Sunshine. Mr. Sunshine. If you haven't heard of Mr. Sunshine is an absolutely phenomenal, and I do mean phenomenal, historical Korean drama, which essentially just means scripted television out of Korea, that is available on Netflix. It was co-funded by Netflix. It had this massive effing budget. It is beautiful. It's a historical drama that takes place during the turn of the 20th century. Why is that really interesting? Because during the turn of the 20th century, we come into one of the most chaotic and volatile periods for Korea. And that is because tons of different countries were kind of trying to all put their claws into Korea, and ultimately it ended in the Japanese takeover and occupation of Korea, which lasted basically till the end of World War II. So 40-something years. Really sad, but super interesting. It is a phenomenal show. I highly recommend it. Like, I really can't sing its praises enough. I think the writer Kim In-suk, thus far, I pretty much think it's her masterpiece in terms of things she's written on her own. But this is essentially a novelization of the entire, like, 20-something episode series, which admittedly is rare. K-dramas are usually one season, 16 episodes. This is a little longer. Some historicals do tend to run a little longer. I have noticed that. But this is essentially a novelization. I was very excited to get it because it's such a beautiful story. I'm like, I want to have the safe knowledge that it is on my shelf. And I don't necessarily need the script as much as I love the script. Don't get me wrong. I have several Korean script books up there. But in this case, I was like, I don't mind it being a novelization. Plus, I was having trouble finding actually just like the script books. It was either like a photo book or as the novelizations. I'll take the novelizations. Next, we have My Universe Was All You. This is a beautiful illustrated essay book. Korea has a bunch of these, I've discovered, and like US needs to get on this. One, look at this design. I think it's beautiful. It's simple. It's clean. It's gorgeous. I love it. We have illustrations. It's like essays and poems, and it's themed and it's lovely, and like the US needs to get on this. I want more books like this. I want them like this in the US. We don't do them like that. If/when I ever get something I wrote published, I would literally want to say, hi, can you please look at Korean book designs? Like, consider things like this. This is what I want. Also, I just love paperbacks that have the flaps. And are bendy. And have the pre-crease to make me happy. Look, I'm a simple girl of simple needs. Finally, the last book we have is A History of Korea by Kyung Huang. It's the second edition, Palgrave Essential Histories. It is not too long, but I will say there are some aspects of Korean history that I find really particularly interesting, and I have a hard time finding books in English. Really, I like stuff that's often pre-20th century. Mainly, I like stuff from the pre-Joseon period. I like a lot of Goryeo history. I like a lot of the time of the Three Kingdoms history, which is so super interesting. I do find the Joseon era really interesting as well. And in terms of the 20th century, the Japanese occupation is actually kind of interesting to me, only because I like hearing about the rebel efforts, because I'm all for rebels with a cause. What can I say? But this was a book that actually came reasonably recommended as being good in terms of getting a good amount of history of Korea. It is admittedly shorter than I thought it was going to be, but I didn't really look at the page counts. That's sort of my fault. But I do think it has a much more overall focus, because oftentimes when it comes to Korean history books that are in English, they all kind of are about the Korean War, and as important a moment in history as that is, it's not the history that I want to read. I'd rather read about more of the foundational aspects of Korea and like the stuff that really set the culture in place. And so this book seemed to have a lot more of it. So here's to hoping. We'll see how it is. If not, I'll just return to constantly being on the internet, finding articles and falling down information holes, which is what I've been doing for about 10 years by this point. So why change that, I guess? I don't know. We shall see. It'll also be helpful because I like having books where I can leave like post-it flabs and like know where things are. What can I say? I just like hard copies of things. I like having it in my hands so I can read it. But that's it. That is everything that I bought in terms of books. It's fine. Everything's fine. It's March again. I still haven't processed March from 2020.